The DC Council is getting ready to welcome a new council member at large after the seat was vacated by DC Council Chair Phil Mendelson. Reporter Rachel Rood heard what some of the candidates had to say at a forum in DC on Thursday.
Foggy Bottom was the perfect chance for the candidates to let the voters get to know their stances on some of the most important issues.
I am for a living wage. I mean, crime is very rare that you see a bank robbery committed by someone with a job.
I think we need to be very careful about planning too many bike lanes.
But I think we have to have a debate really about how we develop our city and what it should look like.
But I hear from restaurant owners who are concerned about food trucks coming and parking very near them and poaching on what they think of as their business.
We're arresting over 6,000 people for a simple possession of marijuana every year.
The candidates spent 2 hours answering audience questions presented by the moderator. WAMU producer Michael Martinez sat down to tell me what the top priority issue is for the voters in this special election.
I think that there are a number of things on people's minds. One is education. Obviously, it's one of the issues that affects people, whether you live in Tenleytown or whether you live in Berry Farm.
Public schools versus charter schools. The candidates had a lot to say on education.
Look, I visited over 70 schools in the district, not just in Ward 1, but all over the city. I understand the problems that exist, the good and the bad.
There's so much friction and tension between charter schools and DCPS schools.
How is this decision leading to better outcomes in our schools?
But we must create great local schools in every community.
We had two different systems, charter schools and traditional public schools. And the 1954 Supreme Court said that separate could never be equal.
So the question is, who will come out on top? That's something the voters will have to show up and decide for themselves on April 23rd. For District Wire News, I'm Rachel Rood.
There are 7 candidates running for the DC Council this year. Two of the candidates join us in the studio today, Perry Red and Paul Zuckerberg. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, I'd like to start off by talking about education, in particular the charter school movement. It appears as though more and more students are being enrolled in charter schools. And I'd like to ask what you think this means for the future of public schools, Mr. Red.
Sure. Well, this is part of a national movement, chiefly by ideological conservatives, to defund public assets, public entities. We saw the draining of unions, labor unions. And what's happened with our public schools is it's been under attack. And so the excuse our city leaders have given us is simply that the schools are under-enrolled. Well, they're going to be under-enrolled if you dump all the students into these charter schools. These charter schools are privately funded, partially privately funded, and it creates an unequal system, one that borders on segregation. It's unconstitutional actually at its core because you have two separate systems. And the Supreme Court in 1954 in Brown versus Du Bois said that separate can never be equal. So I have a problem with it. I don't like the dynamic.
Okay, Mr. Zuckerberg, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I have a different take on it. About 70% of the students in DC are involved in some type of lottery, school lottery. 45% are in charter schools, and another 25% are out of boundary. So these are parents who are making educational decisions for their kids through the lottery system, and many are happy with what they find. It's very important that we not fester a war between charter schools and DCPS. We have to remember that both are serving the same clientele, DC public school students, and we have to find a way for the systems to work together for the benefit of all students.
Okay, so going forward, do you two believe that public schools and charter schools can coexist in the district? Do you think that they can continue to operate together?
They can and they must, and it's a part of the job of the DC Council to bring the parties together to discuss sharing facilities, improving best practices in all the schools. We're seeing now, for example, the new teacher contract for DCPS schools is going to include longer days and a longer school year. The teachers are going to be compensated for that extra time, but that's a change that was spurred by the charter school movement. But we cannot put parents against parents, teachers against teachers. We all have to remember the same goal, which is the students.
And my position on that is, as far as coexisting is concerned, they have to be combined. They have to be under one auspice, with one leader, one leadership. The idea that you have two separate entities, you'll always have competing interests. And that's problematic on its face. And if indeed charters are so great and they fare so well, and we haven't seen that empirically, but if they fare so well, they have the winning formula, then why isn't that formula being shared with the public schools, with the traditional public schools? And so what that says to me is, and I may sound like a conspiracy theorist, but what it says to me is that there are some interests there that don't have all of our children at heart. And so when we win that 13th seat on council, our goal is to exercise responsibility to all of our children in the city.
Okay, I'd like to just to play a quick soundbite by, it was actually at the forum last week, one of your fellow candidates, Patrick Mara. He's talking about school libraries. If we could play that.
You know, I'm the son of a retired public school librarian, and I think it's pretty difficult if you don't have a parent at home taking to the community library, whose hours should be extended, to not receive books in some way. And so that's why I think having school libraries is very important, and I would say a lot more about this topic, but we have 2 minutes.
Okay, if we just take a step back and take a more holistic view about district schools, I'd like to get your opinion. What is the best way of improving the district schools, Mr. Zuckerberg?
Well, for early education, I believe that year-round schooling, longer school days, and more programs for the young students to help students, particularly those who are coming from troubled families, is going to help. For high schools, we need to give high school students marketable skills when they graduate. So a high school diploma doesn't do it anymore. You need other job skills that are going to help these kids compete in the marketplace and find good jobs. So we have 2 specific goals for 2 different age groups.
Yeah, and to increase effectiveness in our schools, to make them better, one of the pieces that my colleague, Mr. Zuckerberg, alludes to is training for more technical job opportunities upon graduation. That's one of the faults. And one of the things I don't like about VOTEC, where you're talking about, mechanics and construction workers. What I'm talking about is 21st century jobs, 22nd century jobs. But to make the school better, I believe I have a plan called our After School Network. And in our After School Network, we use the public entities and facilities that we have, libraries, rec centers, to continue the education process in a more informal setting for our students in those hours between 3:30 and 9 p.m. So that's one of the things we want to do, including cyber inclusion, so all children are connected.
Okay, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut the debate short, but thank you, Perry Red and Paul Zuckerberg, for joining us today. Thank you very much.
The DC Council special election has been a hot topic in the local media for the last few months, all leading up to a vote on April 23rd. Our reporter Rachel Rood is in the studio with more. Rachel?
Thanks, Julia. I'm here with Washington Examiner reporter Eric Newcomer, who has been covering the special election for the past few months. Eric, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we just heard from 2 candidates out of 7 who are vying for this DC Council position. Can you kind of give us an overview of the race so far? Is there any front runner that's coming out on top?
That's a lively question in and of itself. I wrote an article about a month ago saying that Patrick Mara, the Republican, and Michael Brown, a Democrat who's been on the council before, were the front runners. I mean, but you know, that's still up for debate. I mean, right now there's Anita Bonds, who's currently sitting on the council. She has, you know, a lot of the Democratic establishment behind her, including Marion Barry, and she's received the endorsement of a former DC mayor. And there's Matthew Fruman, who's brought in the most money of any of the candidates running so far. So, you know, it's an open race, and it's a 7-person race, and whoever gets the most votes could win. So any of these candidates could pull it home.
Great. We've been hearing a lot about education. What is the issue that's sort of coming to the front of this election season in terms of what the voters care about? Is that sort of at the top?
I mean, I think education's, you know, always a big issue. I'd also say that, you know, people always sort of talk about ethical issues on the council and, you know, who's the most ethical candidate. I think that's something hard to prove to voters and might have to do more with, you know, sort of how they feel about the candidate and whatever their sort of intuitive reactions are. But I think, you know, education, and I would also put sort of ethics up there, however you want to define it.
Now, yeah, that is something that has been plaguing this campaign for the last few months. Is that sort of related to the low voter turnout that comes with local elections? The Washington Post has predicted that only 50,000 will show up. Are the voters distrusting the candidates?
I mean, I don't know if it says anything about these specific 7 candidates. I think, you know, it's probably fair to say that residents in DC have some skepticism over elected officials here. I think in particular this race, since it's, you know, a special election, you don't have any sort of mayor to go vote for anyway. I mean, the Board of Elections is predicting 14.2% turnout, which is pretty low, and they're giving a referendum that's also on the ballot. They're expecting that to boost some of the turnout. So, yeah, it's going to be. I expect a low turnout race.